Exactly 7 years ago today, the Five Nights at Freddy's security logbook released. And since then, there has been one puzzle that not a single person has been able to solve, despite many attempts. Unlike the Cassidy puzzle, which gave us the name of the fifth of the missing children, which was solved years ago, and pretty much confirmed to be correct based on repeated usage of the name since then, people have not been able to agree on a solution to the other puzzle believed to be hidden inside this book. The puzzle that leads to the name of the crying child. However, recently, a YouTuber by the name of Hyperdroid presented a solution that, while not completely original, as the idea has been tossed around before, a lot of people took to believing is the correct solution to the puzzle, in the name of the crying child. But I believe I found an even stronger solution. To recap for anyone who may not know, in the Survival Logbook, on page 95, there's a 45 by 28 square grid entitled the Foxy Grid, as the page asks you to draw a pixelated version of Foxy within the grid. However, throughout the book, we can see scratchy, faint ghostwriting that seems to be asking someone questions. On certain pages, the ghostwriting would write the words, "my name," and using clues on each of those pages, we could put two numbers into the word search, like a grid, in order to find the name, Cassidy. But in the first few boxes of the grid, Cassidy has written A, B, and C, respectively. The crying child also talks throughout the book, but much less than Cassidy, only answering a few of her questions. The crying child talks by altering certain text within the book, though. The word search is filled with altered text, most of it being altered to the phrase, "it's me." And the word search is how we found the name Cassidy, so it would stand to reason that the opposite grid is used for finding the other character, the crying child's name. And pretty much everyone agrees with all of that, but where Hyperdroid's solution differs from the majority of crying child name solutions is how you actually obtain the coordinates to put into the grid. As I said before, Cassidy asks a lot of questions and the crying child responds to very few of them. 4 exactly. The party was for me, I can see, I can hear sounds, and I'm scared. The party was for me is clearly in response to Cassidy stating the party was for you. Not a question, but still something the crying child actually responds to. And I can't see is obviously in response to the question, what do you see? Though it gets a little messier with the last two. I can hear sounds could be in response to Cassidy asking does he still talk to you, like Hyperdroid claims. However, it just as likely could be a response to the question, is this song familiar to you? And finally, I'm scared, which is extremely vague, but could definitely be a response to Cassidy asking, do you still have dreams? Since we know that the crying child likely had nightmares, though it's not exactly a grammatically correct response. The means of finding the actual name comes from taking the page numbers of the questions Cassidy asks that get responses, and putting them into the grid. Doing this gets the letters E, V, A, and D, which backwards gives us the name Dave. Though for a more in-depth and clear explanation of the solution, I'd recommend going and checking out Hyperdroid's original video, which will also be in the description. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a very good solution, and probably the best we've gotten up until this point. I mean, Dave was also the fake name William used in the Silver Eyes, which was made right around the time of FNAF 4's release. And we've seen the name Dave be used several times in the series since then, and we know FNAF likes reusing names. But, in my opinion, there is something that Hyperdroid missed that both solidifies the solution and also kills it. In order for the puzzle solution to actually make sense, it has to have some sort of innate consistency. Something besides simply giving the answer that tells us each piece of the puzzle fits correctly. With the first two responses the crying child gives, there isn't really a question of what those correlate to. But the fact that I can hear sounds has two questions it is directly related to serves as an issue. Because for the puzzle to properly work, one has to have something the other doesn't have that informs us on which is correct. The same also applies to the final response of I'm scared. Do you still have dreams does fit, yes, but what separates that from something like the question, do any of these toys look familiar to you? In FNAF 4, the plushies transform into the nightmare animatronics, so if that's what this is in reference to, then it should work just as well. In his part 2, he tries to claim a connection between Do You Still Have Dreams and I'm Scared, based on the fact that Mike helps to find the last letter of both Cassidy and the crying child's name. But the thing is, Mike helps to find 4 of the letters in Cassidy's name, not just the last one. The jet ski, the gravestone, for real value see page 61, and the 811. Mike has a large role in finding Cassidy's name, so this doesn't really establish a connection between the two. So, that begs the question. What do all of these 4 questions have in common? that every other question in the book doesn't. And the answer is simple. All of these questions aren't directly asking the crying child if he remembers something. They aren't directly correlated to the crying child's memories. The party was for you isn't a question about what he remembers, it's a statement that the crying child accepts. What do you see is a question about the current moment and the situation, not something about the crying child's memory. Does he still talk to you does technically correlate to memory, but not directly. Cassidy is asking if he still talks to the crying child, which is why the crying child will respond with, I can hear sounds, in comparison to, is this song familiar to you, which is directly asking the crying child if he remembers something, if he remembers the song. Finally, do you still have dreams is just like the last one, asking not if he remembers having dreams, but instead if he still has dreams. It's about the current moment, and once again explains the crying child's odd behavior of I'm scared. Take these questions and compare them to every single other question Cassidy asks throughout the entire book, all of them being about if the crying child remembers something or other. So does that mean the solution is correct? Is this definitive proof of the crying child's name being Dave? I don't think so. Because there is one huge problem with this logic to prove the Dave solution. If the Dave solution is built upon the fact that the crying child only answers questions that do not pertain to memory, thus implying the crying child has forgotten everything, then how can the crying child go about telling Cassidy his name, something tied to his memory? The crying child's answers are only what point to the questions that gives us the page numbers and thus the name, which would mean that the crying child is answering Cassidy's question earlier in the book. Do you remember your name? It breaks the entire logic from which we have built the solution upon. The crying child cannot be the one to answer that question with his name under this solution, because he shouldn't remember it. But the thing is, the crying child does respond to that question. But not with Dave or Evan or Chris or any other name that you can think of, no. The crying child responds to that question earlier in the book. In the word search, the crying child says, "It's me," over and over and over and over again. Because the crying child is responding to Cassidy's question of, do you remember your name? Do you remember your name? It's me. Because the crying child doesn't remember their name. So the only thing they can respond with is, it's me. The crying child even asks within that very same word search what Cassidy's name is. Cassidy asks, do you remember your name? The crying child says, it's me. Then, what is your name? And then Cassidy responds, Cassidy. And the thing is, we actually see this happen in the week before. Quote, Freddy is close now. He opens his mouth, and you wince, expecting him to scream, but instead, he laughs. It sounds like a child's laughter. More children laugh. Bonnie and Chica are watching you from the stage, mouths opening and closing. You're just kids, you say. Who? Freddy's face is inches from your head. He leans down. You wonder what it'll be like to live without your frontal lobe. A warped, garbled voice says, it's me. I've talked a lot about what Cassidy and the crying child say in this book, but what I've yet to really talk about in depth is the third person who writes stuff in this book, Mike, who writes in red pen. While most of what he writes is obvious in meaning, throughout the book he draws multiple sets of nondescript tally marks, seemingly at random, which clearly have some sort of hidden meaning. Hyperdroid presents the idea that since all the tally marks in the book, when added together, equal 39, and one of the pages within the Cassidy puzzle has its page number changed to 39, that the tally marks are simply a starting point for the Cassidy puzzle. But this is extremely flawed. Not only is the Cassidy puzzle extremely obvious without the tally marks, as the large ghost writing of my name is going to be noticed before someone reading through the book can add all the tally marks together, since the last 5 tally marks are on page 100, which is after every single instance of my name. But also, even if someone were to add all the tally marks together, and hypothetically go to page 39, they wouldn't find anything. The actual page 39 has nothing to do with the puzzle. It's the fake page 39 that's somewhere completely different that is important, of which a reader wouldn't find through this method. The fake page 39 isn't even the first page of the Cassidy puzzle that gives a letter, so this supposed method of starting the Cassidy puzzle wouldn't even bring you to the start of the puzzle. It just doesn't work at all. But you know, If anyone were to know the crying child's name and be able to answer Cassidy's question, it would be Michael, the older brother of the crying child. The tally marks are the means to find the solution to the Foxy Grid and the crying child's name, and I know a lot of people have already tried to find solutions using the tally marks and claim to have solutions, and a lot of them are not very good. If you want a good example of this, go check out the Chiptide's video, who was partially the inspiration for making this video. But the thing is, there is something so obvious, so simple, so clear that somehow everyone has overlooked. On pages number 9, 19, 31, 36, and 100, Michael seems to write tally marks in his signature red pen. 5 tally marks, 10 tally marks, 14 tally marks, 5 tally marks, and another 5 tally marks, respectively. Also, we know on page number 95, there is the Foxy Grid. Traditionally, tally marks are used for the purpose of counting. Taking this into account, the page in which the tally marks are written should be the last in the counting sequence. So, if we flip backwards the amount of pages there are tally marks till we reach the first page, we should be a step closer. Let's specifically look at page 100, which has 5 tally marks. Flipping back 5 pages lands on, wouldn't you guess it, page 95, the page that contains the infamous Foxy Grid. I was astonished. The last set of 5 tally marks is 5 pages after the Foxy Grid. This can't be a coincidence, and this is what led me down this rabbit hole. This not only tells us what to do with these tally marks, but also confirms the connection between the tally marks and the grid. We can assume these last 5 tally marks have no other numbers associated that go into the grid, because they only seem to exist to tell us where to put the other numbers we will soon find, especially if you take into account the first 4 sets of tally marks are all within the first 36 pages of the book, with these marks being all the way on page 100, showing the separation. Now, let's go back to the first tally marks. They're on page number 9. 5 tally marks means 5 pages backwards, which lands us on page number 4. An infamous page for the solutions to this grid, but for all the wrong reasons. Looking here, we can see a total of 3 standout numbers, Night 1 being first, as well as the noticeable 5 and 3 on the Fox's magazine. Due to the 5 and 3 being intersected by the hook, and the subtle total of 8 stars on this magazine cover, we can assume we are supposed to add 5 and 3 to get 8. Pair this with the 1 from earlier, and you have 1, 8 as coordinates, ordered from top to bottom, just like how you would read. Next, we have 10 tally marks on page 19. Upon flipping back 10 pages, we realize this actually brings us back to page 9, the same page with the first set of tally marks, which seems to double down on this being intentional. Now, besides the 5 from the tally marks, there doesn't really seem to be another standout number here. That is, until you recognize where those tally marks are located. In the bottom right corner of the page, right where you would expect the page number to be. As I said before, this is page number 9, so next we have the numbers 5 and 9, with the number that is actually there being first, and the number that should be there being second. It's also important to note that this page is a reference to FNAF 2, as during the custom night, if you were to complete certain predetermined challenges, then certain objects would get added to your desk. Plushies of each of the 5 original characters, a Balloon Boy toy, a Toy Bonnie figurine, the cupcake, and a microphone, which is a total of 9 different items, potentially hinting at the fact we're meant to flip backwards 9 pages. Moving on to page 31, this one is by far the most interesting, but for reasons we will get to later. We can see that there are a total of 14 tally marks. However, they are oddly split into a group of 5 and 9. Remember this for later, but currently it's unimportant. Flipping back 14 pages lands us on a coupon page for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. However, this page is filled with numbers you could attempt to draw from. It's unclear what is important and what isn't. So there has to be some outlier, something that stands out as out of place or incorrect. But this will only show its face once we refer to the other coupon pages throughout this book. Besides this one on page 17, there are 3 other coupon pages within these binds. One on page 33, another on page 63, and the final one on page 79. Now, at first glance, nothing seems out of the ordinary, but there is a pattern established throughout the coupon pages that isn't present on page 17. Page 33, we can see that the value amount that is being saved from each coupon increases by a consistent amount as we go down. Top one is $4, the middle is $6, and the bottom is $8. Then on page 63, we see something similar. The top is $4, middle is $5, and bottom is $6. Finally, on page 79, we see the same thing again, with 12, 14, and 16. It's very consistent. But now let's go back to page 17. As we can see, the middle and bottom coupons follow this pattern, with 5 and 6 respectively, but the top coupon is for $8. That breaks our pattern. It should be 4, just like on page 63, with 4, 5, 6. But no, it's 8. That gives us our two numbers for these tally marks, 8 and 4. And just like before, we order it as the number that is there and the number that should be there. Another interesting thing to point out that may further solidify this is how page 31 is clearly themed around Happiest Day and even mentions it directly, while the Happiest Day coupon on page 32 is also for $8, further suggesting the possibility that we are meant to be working with the $8 coupon on page 17. Finally, we get to the last set of tally marks on page 36. 5 tally marks and 5 pages back lands us back on page 31. Same thing as what happens with the second set of tally marks. Quite interesting, ain't it? This is where that separation from before comes into play. The tally marks are split into 2 groups, a group of 5 and a group of 9. Those are our 2 final numbers, 5 and 9. Again, just like before, you read them from left to right, how you would a book. So 5 is the first, and 9 is the second. Now, if we take all of these numbers and refer back to the grid, we should be given the name of our mysterious, crying child. 1 and 8 in the grid gets you the letter D. 5 and 9 in the grid gets you the letter A. 8 and 4 in the grid gets you the letter M. And of course, once again, 5 and 9 gets you the letter A. Now, I know, Dama doesn't look like a name, and it isn't, but when we rearrange these letters in the associated tally mark's numerical value, well, you get the name Adam. Adam Afton. The crying child's name is Adam. But that's not even all. If we look at the popular names for the time period, Adam was one of the most popular, reaching its peak popularity just before 1983. And look at the other names of the Afton family members. Michael and Elizabeth, both names that have a lot of biblical relevance. Michael being the name of the archangel who sends Satan to hell, and Elizabeth meaning consecrated to God. Then there's Adam, probably one of the most well-known biblical names ever. But the thing is, I can't say with complete confidence that this is the correct solution. There are just too many things to consider. While I was looking for a solution for the tally marks, I stumbled upon a bunch of different shit that suggests completely different puzzles, yet feels intentional. For instance, the very last set of tally marks on page 100 talks about how you would design a pizzeria if you were in charge, which got me thinking about FNAF 6, which then made me realize that this was technically the 6th set of tally marks. So I started going back through them. The first set doesn't really have anything that explicitly states FNAF 1, it's just about designing an animatronic, but the second set, as we talked about before, is on a page that is deliberately one big FNAF 2 reference with the table and JJ. Then the 3rd and 4th set of tally marks are both on a Happiest Day themed page, whereas FNAF 3 and 4 are pretty much centered around Happiest Day, granted in their own unique ways. Then the 5th set of tally marks, while not being a super strong connection, is tied to Mangle, who in a way is Funtime Foxy, as proven by FNAF World, which gives a weak but albeit still existing connection between the 5th set of tally marks and the 5th game sister location. Parts of this feel obvious, especially given this book came out right after Sister Location, but I just couldn't make anything of it. But even still, there is the weird fact that if you add all the tally marks together, you get the number 39, which is the total number of nights between FNAF 1 and 6. Coincidence? Maybe. But it could also somehow suggest that Michael is the player character through every single night of every single game, even though that doesn't make sense. There's just so many ways you could take these stupid numbers. But I do think at its bare bones, the 5 tally marks being 5 pages after the Foxy grid is a really strong connection and a really big tell on how to solve for the crying child's name. And if you guys disagree with how I got the letters from there, I implore you to go and try and figure it out. After I had figured that out, it still took me a while to actually get to the name Adam. And I'll admit, it's not perfect. It is a little bit shaky, as much as I do like the solution. There might be a better one out there using that starting point. And if anyone finds it, make a video, talk about it, hell yeah. While I think this is correct, there is totally a possibility that there could be another that is more correct. And Hyperdroid could be correct. This is no ill will towards Hyperdroid, of course. He's a great YouTuber. And if you haven't, I'd urge you to go check out Hyperdroid's original video. It's very good, and so is the follow-up. Now, just wanted to end this video with a big shout out to the Chiptide, as his video, as I said before, was an inspiration for this one. So if you haven't seen his logbook video yet, I definitely recommend you go check it out. And once again, it's in the description. Stupid fucking book. I fucking hate this thing. God damn it. You know what? Fuck it.